Welcome to Fintech Confidential, bringing you the people, tech, and companies that change how you pay and get paid. Although it doesn't seem like it would be very compatible with leveraging blockchain and stablecoins and crypto. They've done a lot of work in expanding out the ability to settle funds in USDC to individual merchants and accounts.
I think it's brilliant of them because look at kind of Blockbuster or Amazon, right? You didn't want to keep up with what was happening. And in this situation, you would think that they would be against it because they get that fee. Every time I swipe my credit card, a fee goes to Visa or MasterCard. And this way, it kind of eliminates or decreases that fee. Especially with the change in administration, there's definitely a positive sentiment for institutions and building. We can save money and make money using this technology. Blockchain is much more efficient with different structures, back office systems. There's the front office of actually generating more revenue as well. So people have left the United States, but they're actually coming back to the United States now, which is super exciting to see.
JP Morgan released a report. It's showing a surge in institutional interest. With over 60% of the institutions that were surveyed, they're planning to increase their exposure over the next 12 months. The fact that SEC dropped their lawsuit against Ripple and XRP is another huge one.
Franklin Templeton, CEO, she believes all funds will be tokenized because it's faster, cheaper, and more secure. They can also be used as collateral when we get into the financial markets when we're looking at collateral. You know, if you think about FTX was, a hoodie that got over his skis, right? And I think there weren't any suits around from the risk and compliance perspective, from a board perspective, from that. And so I think that just highlights, for example, hey, let's work together. We're going to build a better product and we'll have less false starts.
Bitcoin 2025 lands in Las Vegas at the Venetian May 27th through the 29th. And Fintech Confidential is there as an official media partner. We're on site with full access to over 200 speakers, breakthroughs in mining, lightning in scale, real-world use cases, institutional Bitcoin strategy, and you'll hear from folks like Michael Saylor, Elizabeth Stark, Jack Mallers, and Senator Cynthia Loomis. There's no fluff, no noise. This is where Bitcoin and digital assets get real. Your pass is waiting at fintechconfidential.com/BTC. So prices are rising and seats are moving. So be there at Bitcoin 2025, Las Vegas, Nevada. Embrace the game theory. Welcome to this episode of Web3 with FTC. If you're asking how blockchain, crypto, AI, even quantum computing fits into your business strategy, this show is really built for you. We'll talk with builders and decision makers who are doing the work. You'll hear smart conversations, straight insights with absolutely no filler. Whether you're a founder, exec, or just trying to stay ahead, this is where real talk meets real tech. And of course, this show is powered by Fintech Confidential, where we keep it practical. We cover the shifts in the industry that matter, and you'll get the signal, not the noise. So let's go ahead and get started. Annelise, I am excited to have you on today so we can dive into the discussion around stablecoins. It seems to have picked up so much momentum just in the last couple months. I can't wait to find out your perspective on what we should be thinking about.
Ted, thank you so much for having me. I've watched many of your podcasts, so I'm super excited to actually be a guest on one. So happy to partake in the conversation. I'm super excited about 2025 and all that we have to build and grow this year.
So you've met today's guest, and she's someone who doesn't just follow trends, she builds around them. I'm talking about Annelise Osborne. With her 20 years of experience around structured finance, real estate, capital markets, and now blockchain. She's held senior roles at Hoodies and helped launch tokenized securities way before most people even knew what that meant. And now she's the chief business officer at Cadena. Now, what makes Annelise stand out? Well, other than the fact that she's done some amazing things in the industry, she's about practical application. She's worked with regulators. She's built products. She's been in boardrooms. She's been on the blockchain and even wrote a book called From Hoodies to Suits. It's a survival guide for anyone trying to understand how blockchain fits into real world finance. Now, I need to make sure that we talk about Cadena. for just a second. They're one of the few proof of work layer ones doing it right. Scalable smart contracts, almost unlimited throughput, and it is no nonsense. They're also tackling security, usability, and performance in ways that big institutions are finally paying attention to. So yeah, it's going to be a good one. So let's go ahead and get into it. Annelise, I know we had to reschedule this, but I am so happy to have you on because so much has changed from the time that we first started talking about this to today. The regulatory environment is completely different. The perspective from the overarching industry has changed. And heck, even since we first started talking about this, there are 2 new conferences that are squarely focused on stablecoin. So I'm excited to really dive in and talk to you about this subject today.
I'm so excited to be here. Looking forward to it.
Before we dive into it, I would love for you to share with the audience what your perspective is on the current state of blockchain, digital assets, and financial services related to it.
I have been in this space for a while. So I started in 2018, the focus was on using this technology to launch traditional securities. And at the time, it was kind of uncool because crypto was much more cool, but now it's kind of come full circle, I feel like. And now institutions are focused on what this technology can bring. So, especially with the change in administration, there's definitely a positive sentiment for institutions and building. So we can save money and make money using this technology. Blockchain is much more efficient with different structures, back office systems, and there's the front office of actually generating more revenue as well. So I think there's been concerns about regulation in the United States. From an institutional perspective, it's very difficult. You can't play in the gray. You need black and white. Europe and MiCA have been able to actually define what they can and can't do, which has been a lot easier. So people have left the United States, but they're actually coming back to the United States now, which is super exciting to see. And we're expecting to have defined regulation. I think you'll see that there was a lot of SEC enforcements that have been taken back. So instead of ruling by enforcement, which was a comment that had been done previously, I think the regulators are much more open, and legislatures much more open to learn and recognize what works and what doesn't. So we've come out recently that proof of work is not a security. We've come out recently that meme coins are not securities. So just the fact that that regulation and legislation are looking at this technology with a different set of eyes and not as something that is against, it is something negative or to be put down, is super exciting. So definitely I could talk about this forever, so I'm sorry, but like institutions are also interested at public internet versus private internet. And that is a big step because I think
that is huge.
It's huge. If you look at like the intranet way back when the internet started and the companies were concerned about access to an open internet, we had bulletin boards for our company, like within companies, and they're not very efficient. There's not a lot you can do with that. And so I equate that to the private blockchain versus the public blockchain. And it's exciting to see how things are starting to move from private to public. And I do think we will find ways to deal with both permissioning and privacy. But we can get into that in our conversation.
No, definitely. Well, let me hit on something that you said that made me really think through it. I don't remember exactly when it was released, but it's been in the last few months. JP Morgan released a report and it's showing a surge in institutional interest for blockchain, digital assets, with over 60% of the institutions that were surveyed. They're planning to increase their exposure over the next 12 months. And especially since 131 was rescinded, that makes a big difference as well. Plus, you talked about the regulatory environment, the fact that SEC dropped their lawsuit against Ripple and XRP is another huge one that is just moving everything forward. And I would love to understand what other items maybe that we're missing, right? That is causing this growing interest and changing the stance for institutional adoption. And other than the ones we've already talked about, what other signals are you seeing firsthand that they're telling us we're headed in a more of a bull market direction?
I can't not mention that the president of the United States has launched a stablecoin, because that is, there's a lot of stablecoin regulation.
I was wondering if we would get to
that's
that.
out there. There's a lot of stablecoin regulation that's out there. I think stablecoin and payments is probably going to be the first big uptick in adoption for blockchain technology, whether you're using it or not. There's just so many efficiencies there. But I will go back to the institutional. There's two different ways to look at institutional adoption. I think one is, are we investing in cryptocurrencies as an alternative asset class? So are our clients investing in Bitcoin? Obviously, there's the Bitcoin ETF, there's the Ethereum ETF, the idea of an institution can actually invest just like they do it today in a actual traditional structure. They can invest in Bitcoin as, in essence, an alternative asset investment or store of value. So there's that. Obviously, you're paying fees to have it for the traditional finance structure, whereas you could just put it in a wallet. But again, institutions are getting there. It's a process. It's not overnight. The other institutional adoption outside of do we own crypto is, are we using this technology to actually build applications, which would be, are we using it for collateral repo? So I think there's a lot to do in repo markets. I think that you mentioned JP Morgan, they're a star in saving money with their internal JP Morgan coin, which is an internal stable coin, which is representative of the US dollar. That is, they're saving money doing repo transactions on stablecoin. So I think that's a big step as well. Bonds could be tokenized, funds are being tokenized. Like, we can get into more specific examples, but I think institutions are finding ways to make money and save money, both by using this technology. So there's different steps to adoption.
So I would love to understand, and I'm going to ask you to go back into the archives, right? You've been in tokenization of real world assets from early. Now we're getting into the larger adoption. What lessons have you learned during, your time going through this? And, what is the transition story from traditional finance to digital assets look like from your perspective?
For me, coming out of traditional finance, I was asked to join a regulatory task force for ICOs at the time. And that is how I learned about blockchain. So I actually learned a lot. And in learning, I recognized this makes perfect sense for the financial markets and efficiency in capital markets. So kind of the progress of moving forward in institutions, coming traditional finance to take it up to DeFi, because I do believe DeFi and TradFi will merge, but we'll get there. I think there's different steps along the way. I think the first one, there's three kind of holdbacks right now to institutional adoption. I think number one is education. I think part of it is understanding, what is it? How does it make sense to me? Change is difficult, and trying to, accept something that is different. But if we look at innovation, we have supercomputers in our hands, right? This is more technology than we got to the moon with. So I don't think we should be afraid of change, but part of that is opening your mind. So finance isn't broken. Can it be better? Absolutely. Look at the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. It used to be shoulder to shoulder, and now no one's on it. Except for a very few people. So I feel like this is just part of the progress. So I think blockchain technology, whether we say that term or not, is just part of the process of us continuing to innovate. So first is education, to understand what it is, how it can be used, how it can be applied. I think of some of the best use cases we can't even recognize yet, because we're not digital yet in finance, fully digital. Next, I think, is regulation. I think regulation is important. I think we're definitely going to make strides in that this year and in the next few years, just coming up with a framework of what works and what doesn't work. The institutions are run by lawyers and risk committees, and they should be, right? And so you have to make sure this institution that's been around for a long time is not going to make a bad choice that's going to risk their reputation or risk any potential litigation. And then lastly, I think it's integration. So it kind of interoperability. So interoperability, which could be between, if I'm an institution, I have very old systems, and from regulation, it's record keeping. They generally just build upon the systems. And also, it's not all the same. Every kind of group, for example, at a bank, every group could have different technology cases that they have built on top of. So it's not fully consistent. So I think that will take a while to upgrade to the most recent standards. I think some more nascent industries like gaming, for example, will be a lot faster because it's already digital, or some economies that have started later that aren't as institutionalized as the United States will be a lot faster to adopt. We're dealing with interoperability between blockchains, but I do think there will be multiple chains out there as we go forward. I think different chains offer different opportunities, but I do think there will be an interoperable ecosystem and standards within the industry.
I can't help but see stable coins becoming that gateway product to get people to understand how to traverse from one chain to the next. You're using Circle's USDC, which, by the way, recently surpassed over $50 billion in circulation. So that's really demonstrating how the growth and adoption of stablecoin has really started to bridge a gap between the TradFi and the DeFi side of the house. Do you also see stablecoins? Is that quote unquote gateway drug of digital assets?
Number one will be stablecoin, and I think we'll move on to funds and debt as well following up. But look at stablecoins. It's $230 billion right now as market cap. Now that's almost the same as the amount of Visa transactions in a year, just to give you an idea of the volume of that. It's really run by Tether has about 2/3 of the market, which is less regulated and unlikely to have a big presence in the United States because of that. And then a Circle.
They're supposedly getting prepared to come to the U.S. and go through all of the regulatory hurdles. So I didn't count them out quite yet.
Well, true. It's a very large, the U.S. is a huge market, right? And if you think about the trillions of dollars that pass through the markets every single day, it's hard to not do that because stablecoin has a number of benefits. So and globally, it's not just in the US. If you think about a lot of countries that have taken on stablecoins for financial insecurity or instability, right? You can hold, you can transfer. It's easier to open a wallet than a bank account. Something to think about. So if you're in other countries where you have volatile currency fluctuations, you could hold it in stablecoin. You could hold it for storing value. You could for spending. For DeFi, I think it's obviously important. But one of the huge things outside of just regular payments, we're not using it yet to buy coffee, but we will be, is cross-border payments. I mean, cross-border payments, billions of dollars are spent on cross-border payments, just sending money from point A to point B, not even currency risk. And so I think that's going to be huge. And a lot of countries are looking at creating central banks' digital currencies. This is kind of outside the US, just to deal with cross-border payments because you can save billions of dollars with cross-border payments. You're not going to have the lag in time. Think about it this way. Personally, right? I cashed a check the other day. Took 5 days to clear. Probably took 5 days to get that check, right? So that's 10 days. Now, if you use stablecoin, I can get that money immediately, which means I can put that money to work immediately. So if institutions are using stablecoins, think of the trillions of dollars a day that go through the economy. That increases the velocity of money. And so I think there's a lot more opportunities, and I think that could also benefit the economy. So to benefit in the United States economy, majority of the stablecoin are backed by US dollars or US debt treasuries. So all of that, even though some people are concerned stablecoins in the United States will hurt the US dollar, this is well backed by the US globally. And so this is, $230 billion, a majority of that, and a majority is probably in the mid 90s are backed by US dollars. That's my guess. I didn't find the final number before the call still.
You're building a fintech product. You want to offer digital assets, but wallets, that's the hard part. Security, compliance, key orchestration, blockchain integration. That's why fintechs, payment platforms, and custodians choose Dfns. They provide wallets as a service that's API first, multi-chain by design, and secured with MPC. No single point of failure. So you can launch across over 50 blockchains, automate policy controls, and stay audit ready without managing private keys. Stripe's Bridge powers crypto payments through Dfns. MoonPay scales wallets securely with Dfns. Sphere grew without compromising on control or compliance. Even major FIs like Fidelity, ABN AMRO, as well as custodians like Zodia and Tungsten trust Dfns to power their on-chain infrastructure. Developer ready, compliance approved, production grade from day one. If you're building in payments, exchanges, OTC desks, market makers, or DeFi, Dfns wallets work the way you need them to. Request your demo at fintechconfidential.com/DFNS. Dfns, secure wallets built right. But, it's funny you were talking about cross-border. That was probably the number one use case that I saw in the early days for crypto in general, whether we were using Bitcoin or ETH or, I had the opportunity to work really closely with Ripple when they were leveraging XRP. Now they have their own stable, but, leveraging XRP at all these different places all over the world. And one of the use cases that we ran into is that there was a very well-known company in the US that's in the defense arena that was sending tens and hundreds of millions of dollars every single day to a location that was in the Middle East. And in order to get the money there, it would take 7+ days. It would never arrive in the amount that they expected it to arrive because it had to traverse multiple different financial institutions. But when it finally reached the final destination, they then converted it to their local currency and then converted it to US dollar. So, you look through that, it's 7 days, multiple currency conversions. You lose money every time you convert because they don't do it for free. That'd be really cool if they did, but they don't. And then they went through that. And then by just switching over to leveraging that end-to-end solution using a value that didn't change between the two, we were able to do that same day, funds availability. It only went through one review at the bank when we off-ramped it into the financial institution's bank account. It was so much faster. And I'm seeing that happen more and more and more and faster and faster and faster. And when you get to the stablecoin perspective, now this starts to allow the financial institutions the ability to start to see what it looks like when you have digital assets sitting right beside your traditional assets within the bank's ledgering technologies. Now, is it going to be easy? No, I don't think it's going to be easy for them, but it gives us a view into what could be. I do want to dive in and, you hit on it a little bit, right? The driving factors that are really seriously pushing institutions forward. I think one of the really interesting things is that the European Investment Bank's recent issuance of a $100 million digital bond on the Ethereum blockchain, that just shows that traditional financial institutions and tools and instruments are being leveraged in the crypto space to really look at that. And what was really cool about that is that it wasn't just a 1-to-1 ratio. It wasn't just this value for that value, the value, internet value, as I call it. It wasn't just that. It was because it has the ability to have all of the smart contract information on it, and it was able to manage it as it was going. So I would love to get your perspective on how important the institutions and how seriously they're taking the programmability of these types of tools.
I think there's huge benefits in programmability. I think institutions aren't quite there yet because they're doing the first step. And the first step is kind of putting your feet in the water before diving in. That said, if you look at, I'm a huge believer in debt. It's in a big Excel spreadsheet, which is totally programmable, right? It can come and go, and you could program what it pays, when it pays. You don't have to lift a finger. You have servicers can check it. So it doesn't have to be like, we're not getting rid of people totally, but it's a lot of what has, and I worked in fixed income for a long time. There's error, and it's human error generally. It's right. So if we have it already calculated out, the money can hit my account. I can be paid in stablecoin. So I think there's a bunch of benefits. Now, from a debt perspective, the World Bank launched a bond back in 2018. So it's definitely been something that's been planned out. And that was back kind of in Australia, I believe. A lot is happening in Europe because of MiCA, which is the regulation. And there's a lot of bonds that are being launched in Europe, even being rated by the rating agencies. So that is super exciting. There's a lot of times it's a digital twin. So it actually is in paper form. And then the idea of settlement on chain is difficult. But this is happening in Europe now. Now in Europe, there are non-digital twins. So it's actually full execution on the blockchain. Institutions, when we're doing $100 million bond, that's institutional, right? It's not going to be bought by retail players. And so that is a big step in, faster, cheaper, more secure is what we can get from blockchain. And I feel like the institutions, especially European institutions, are stepping into that. That's as in they're actually recognizing that and actually launching the projects. But also we need buy side and sell side. So it's easy, we can create that, but we also have to have somebody to buy it. And I feel like that's the slower part right now, is actually having someone want to accept that and hold that in custody. But as you mentioned, we have changing custody rules in the United States. I think that's gonna happen. I will say that even though the U.S. we haven't seen the fixed income uptick in blockchain digital assets that we have in Europe. There's happening in sandboxes. There's a lot happening in Singapore, for example, in the Singapore sandbox, where U.S. institutions are working in the sandbox to actually create fixed income because it's not black. It's not black and white in the United States yet. It's gray, whereas there's more clarity in Europe. So are institutions looking at it? Absolutely. There's a lot of money that can be saved from efficiencies here, and obviously error that I mentioned before. So I do think that we're going to kind of shrink the cost of fundraising, right? If we're using blockchain technology, there's a cost to innovation. So the first ones are more expensive with legal fees and kind of integration into your system. But as this picks up, it's a huge decrease in costs. So absolutely, institutions are looking at it.
One of your first experiences was real world asset tokenization. Where do you think we are today with real world asset tokenization? What do you think is holding us back? And where do you think it could be in the next 12 months?
I might look a little further out than 12 months, but I will tell you my thoughts in the next 12 months. But I kind of think like 5 years is going to be very different than where we are today. I think there's a lot of benefits using this technology for efficiency in capital markets, which is kind of, faster, cheaper, more secure. I think there's I think the first uptick in real world assets outside of technically stablecoin is tokenized funds and money market funds. And so that's where we're seeing the first real push. It's kind of which sector makes the most inroads. Franklin Templeton, CEO, mentioned that she believes all funds will be tokenized because it's faster, cheaper, and more secure. Right? And those aren't the terms she used, but generally there's a cost savings associated with it. I think the tokenized money market funds are being used now within stable coins as well. They can also be used as collateral when we get into the financial markets when we're looking at collateral. I think the idea of tokenized funds also works from an alternative asset perspective. If we're looking at what Hamilton Lane, what Apollo has done in finding private equity, Franklin Templeton as well, like tokenizing private equity funds or tokenizing venture funds or assets. And the idea there is that it's difficult to onboard an investor. And generally, a lot of these alternative asset, we'll just say private equity funds, it's expensive. And the minimum buy-in is, $5-10 million, right? Because you're generally going to an institutional crowd. If you look at the world of kind of money flows and investments. There's more money right now in the retail hands, and people are looking for alternative investments. There's fewer public companies, there's more private companies. And how does the average person, how can they participate, or even accredited investor participate? So what's happening now is with these newer funds, it's a smaller buy-in. So, be it even $100,000. Well, that's a big change from $1 million or $10 million, right? And that's going to work its way down. So, you or I have the opportunity to invest in a private equity fund, which before was only institutionals. And the reason also that institutions want to do this, right? Asset managers want to find more clients and they want to access more money. And so there's a whole bunch of retail money and there's a demand for this. I kind of feel like the ICO boom was a demand for people wanting to invest in something of a private asset. It's kind of like they missed out on the web boom, like back in Web 2, we call it, I guess, 2.0. And they wanted to find opportunities to invest and have potentially outsized returns, or just returns that are different than diversified than, the stock market. So anyway, that's kind of how that's where I see the world developing first.
Why do you think that when people think about real world asset tokenization, the first place that I hear about most frequently is real estate? Why is that the first place people go when they look at that?
So fortunes have been made in real estate, and it is only open to the select few. I think that's the idea, right? If we look at ultra high net worth, they own real estate. If we look at, and I worked in commercial real estate for a long time too. So I think the opportunity to have a piece of something that is income producing and that has the opportunity to generate wealth and appreciate. So I think that's the thought process is I'd like to be able to own a piece of something that I can't buy today because I don't have $100 million, but I'd like to be able to buy a piece of that. Now, there's different ways you can buy a piece of that today. So you can invest in a REIT, which is a real estate investment trust, which is generally public. There are private ones. But that is kind of a company is deciding and diversifying, and you get an income stream of the money that comes in from them, or profits, I guess. But this is more, I'd like a piece of the Chrysler building or the Empire State Building or the, World Financial Center. So I think the idea is kind of, is exciting. There's a lot of tax benefits owning real estate as well with amortization, what have you. So I think that's the thought process, is that I would love to have the opportunity to become a real estate mogul, and maybe I can do it by some sort of tokenization aspect.
I like to tie like things that people use every single day to like this discussion to kind of help them understand. And one of the things that I'm lucky enough to have some insight and work with some folks, but the Visa card that people use on a daily basis, although it doesn't seem like it would be very well, very compatible with leveraging blockchain and stablecoins and crypto. They've done a lot of work in expanding out, even so much to support the ability to settle funds in USDC to individual merchants and accounts. I think that more or less illustrates how even traditional players that you would think were competing with this technology are using it to facilitate more cost-effective movement of the funds in what would be rather seen as a traditional payment infrastructure. Have you had any insights or any thoughts or anything around other areas that maybe we wouldn't expect, but end up being partnerships like that?
Sure. And I think it's brilliant of them, because look at kind of Blockbuster or Amazon, right? You didn't want to keep up with what was happening. And in this situation, you would think that they would be against it because they get that fee. Every time I swipe my credit card, a fee goes to Visa or MasterCard. And this way it kind of eliminates or decreases that fee. But to your point, get ahead of it. They're looking at it, finding ways to decrease their own fees. So in that whole kind of working themselves out of a job, which I don't think they are in any mean, but I think that they have to pay attention, right? I think the banks,
I know
the
a lot
financial
of people that
systems,
looked at it that way. I know a lot of people that have looked at it that way.
I do think technology is a tool and people are still needed for that tool. So I hear a lot of AI man versus the machine as well. I think banks, if you think about it, DeFi, when I put my money in a bank, the bank gives me maybe nothing, or maybe something tiny, and then they lend it out and they make money off of it, right? If DeFi, I don't need to put it in a bank. I can lend you money, right? And then I can get that return and take away the bank. So I feel like there needs to be a recognition of that. And I think banks are seeing that, of the efficiencies that can be done without having as many people in the middle, right? Say if I want to transfer a security, it touches 10 people, right? We doesn't need to do that. And there's a reason for each one, right? This is because it's highly regulated. But I think this technology can be there, like can actually solve some of those problems that you have so many people. Anyway, look at this. The number one data company in the world is IBM. That's their business, right? If you look in the top 10 globally, you'll see Amazon and Google. That is not their main business, but it's an ancillary business to their main business. But its data is huge, right? And so I'm a believer, just for example, those are kind of Web 2 companies, right? Then I'm a believer that Web 3 company, there will be huge winners in the Web 3 companies. I don't look at it as kind of displacing, but I look at it as upgrading finance that will step up to roles that are actually similar to other companies out there that will also, they're going to have to figure out adopting blockchain, be it in investment management, big RIAs, banks, etc. But I do think that there's going to be a large role to play for some of these crypto companies, which are coming out now that will be big. BlackRock's not even that old, if you think about it, right? BlackRock's the largest asset manager in the world, and they're not that old. So
if you look at what just got announced with Chainlink's partnership with Swift, this shows that there's this growing trust between, and it's like that little upgrade, right? It's like you get it to that next piece and it really gets moving. And that's kind of where when you were talking about that, that's where my brain went.
Exactly. And Swift is a perfect example, right? And DTCC, right? They're actually both really strongly work with blockchain. I was talking to someone from the Fed the other day, and they're actually very pro blockchain and stablecoin and even CBDCs. So super interesting.
Well, and not only that, but you're starting to see custodians hop in, companies like Fireblocks, and then you've seen where Block bought Bridge to cover that piece as well. So there's so much going on right now. We could probably just spend an hour or two just going through like what are the big things that have happened just in the last few weeks. Not even talking months, but the last few weeks. And I think that's really what's got me excited about the movement of stablecoin and how that's being adopted and how people are looking at it. And really, how honestly, and my friends that are in traditional bank-to-bank transfer, please do not kill me. But I think what's going to happen is that it's really cool that in the U.S., the Fed launched FedNow, and the clearinghouse launched RTP. But one of the key things that you said earlier that really struck a chord with me, thinking about where stables and blockchain-based money movement are at, it's not much different from where those new real-time payment tools are at. Everybody's like, hey, I'll accept it. Hey, I'll be Visa. I'll accept the stable coin from Circle. I'll accept USDC. No problem. I'll accept it. But I'm not going to send it. And I'm seeing a lot of very tight controls on what institutions have decided to send funds via these new rails is much, much less than the ones that say we receive it. Now, but keep in mind, you're looking at the top 5 major financial institutions in the country, which cover approximately 80% of all banking. Yes, they do send it, But where we see most of the retail side of the house, I'll use the investment piece of, right? The retail banking side of the house volume happening isn't at those major banks. It's at all of these regional and community banks around the country. And I honestly believe that diving in, when these banks decide to dive in the blockchain environment, that is going to accelerate them beyond their imagination. But I could talk again. I'm just spewing my thoughts, but do you agree or disagree with that position?
No, I think it's super interesting. I think that that community banks, I feel like they are in some ways doing, like, I know Mike Cagney, which over at Figure and Provenance, has been working with community banks, and that's definitely. But I do believe that this is going to be different. You had mentioned they'll accept but not send, and so I was talking to one company that has a crypto group, and they accepted payment in Ethereum, but they didn't know what to do with it, because also it's a problem of how do we hold it. Right? Does the bank have their own? This was not a bank, but does the company have their own wallet? And is that who owns the wallet? How is the wallet owned? So I think there are steps along the way of figuring that out. In this case, they bought an NFT and they have made a big art fixture for their NFT. And so it's really cool, but it's also similar to, obviously it's a step in the process. That's how I look at it, right? It's a step in the process. But I do think there are ways this can all be figured out. I think custodians can step in, but I do believe that we're getting there. We're just not quite there yet.
I can't not talk about the fact that we're talking about moving money really fast. We're talking about immutable ledgers. We're talking all about this fun stuff. How in the heck are we going to make sure that we know who is sending and receiving this? Digital identities, how are we going to regulate the trust factor of it? I mean, this is a growing discussion around the importance of the digital identity and securing all these transactions. What are you thinking? What direction are you hearing others talk about going to lock that down?
First, I will say, when I arrived at JFK week before last, nobody checked my passport, right? And it was because I had global entry. I went, they took a picture of my face. He said he called me by name and said he didn't need to check my passport. That is just an example of technology is moving forward, right? From an identity perspective. If we're talking about securities, so digital asset securities, everything is whitelisted because you have to be KYC'd and AML'd before you can actually get onto the whitelist to purchase this or invest in the security, right? So I think it's a little bit different on the crypto side, but I do think there are, I know companies, even Coinbase, right? They're looking at different ways that they can have a digital identity attached to the account. So it's kind of like a yes, right? As opposed to like a green or red, right? So it's a little bit, it's protective. I think that we need for DeFi and TradFi to merge, which is where I see kind of the world's going, is we will find opportunities for digital identity to show from what are we concerned about when we're transferring? We're concerned about knowing your customer and money laundering, where's the money from? I think there are ways that we will actually develop similar products. So I do meet with a lot of different companies, and I think there's a lot of solutions that are out there. So I don't think, I don't think it's that big of an issue. It only is an issue because it's not fully implemented yet. And there's not a standard, probably is more of it.
Support provided by Skyflow. What if you could build fast but not break privacy? What if you could ensure data privacy, governance, and compliance with just a few API calls? What if you could worry less about PCI requirements while actually improving privacy and security? How much more time would your team have to truly innovate? How much faster could you build and ship new features? How much more powerful could your app be? Skyflow is a zero-trust data privacy vault delivered as an API. Skyflow's radically simple design lets you collect, secure, and tokenize personal information information like card data and payment details. And with built-in features like encrypted data analysis and sharing, anonymization, and advanced governance, your days of choosing between data security and data usability are over. Whether you're just concerned with PCI compliance or need to go further to include CCPA, GDPR, SOC 2, and beyond, Skyflow has you covered. What if you could build fast but not break privacy? With Skyflow, you can. Visit skyflowsecure.com today to learn how. Well, and it's interesting you bring up a standard, because I think it's interesting that the EU brought up MICR first. Now they just agreed on what eIDAs are going to look like and regulate around it, which will give us the ability to put blockchain-based digital identities on chain to secure transactions. I don't know if that's the right way to do it. And the only reason I say that is because that means that now it's become like a physical passport. And so now I have one in Europe, in the EU. Well, now I also have to validate it again in the US. And so each country has its own regulatory environment. And I think the panacea of an ID would be a global ID, where no matter what I did, it was recognized and accessible in all of those different areas, so that I'm not having to go through KYC 4, 5, 6, 7 times.
Yeah. I will say something else to think about is that if I'm BlackRock and my wallet holds BUIDL funds, I don't want anyone to be able to know that's my wallet. So that's a privacy as well. How do we do that without ZK and it being Tornado? Just for example, like to, send things to that wall. Obviously, there's ways we're getting around to block it, but that's something too. Like if I have $10 million in my wallet, I don't want people to know that, but I want to be able to know, I want it to show that I can transfer $2 million if I want to, for example, for a transaction. So I think we're working on ways to solve these, but that's something else that I think about from a privacy perspective if I'm an institution.
It's funny you bring that up. One of the conversations that I've had, and I have a lot of friends that work in fraud, and we always try and make it sound like we're not considering everybody a bad guy, even though that's kind of the approach. The big piece that we've talked about in that sphere is when you're using the blockchain and you are trying to do nefarious activity, it is no longer if you get caught, it's when you get caught. Mm-hmm. At the same time, you're talking about making sure that it's private. So how do you maintain the visibility that is desired within DeFi, but at the same time do the TradFi privacy piece of it? How do you see those two things working together?
Well, I was looking a little differently. Like one, KYC AML is one thing, but also seeing where money transfers, like actually finding, there's a great book called Tracers in the Dark that talks about how money from Silk Road, even going through Tornado Cash, you could actually find it because you can trace the money because it leaves marks everywhere it goes. And so I feel like that's one thing about being able to, it's digital. So you are leaving fingerprints on something, but are they my fingerprints or is it just actually like the amount of money that is passing through? So I kind of look at them differently, but I see the similarities and I see how they could be the same. But I feel like the numbers are anonymous. It's just a matter of, is my name or my regular green score associated with that number that it can be traced back to me? Obviously, that's not what we want.
The fact that DeFi and TradFi, although they started on opposite ends of the table, have started to realize that they aren't really rivals anymore. They're really codependent, for a lack of a better phrase. You can't have one without the other, especially if you want to continue to walk about the cabin and do your daily activities. I would love for you to just quickly give your perspective of what they've what is being seen and how you're seeing that codependency be realized.
Sure. So you think about the Bitcoin white paper came out in 2008, which was kind of the financial crisis, when it was really anti-bank. But regardless, I'm a big believer in this is kind of the hoodies to suits, right? And so the way that I look at it is you have kind of the crypto or the hoodies in the sense that they're tech and entrepreneurs, and they created this $3 trillion market, which is amazing. And the suits are kind of more the TradFi world and the business people and recognize it. And that's the $1 trillion that passes through the system every day, right? So I really feel that they need to work together, and I feel like they complement each other as well. Institutions have a hard time innovating. It's very difficult when you are very set up and stable, just with the mindset and the structure to actually come up with innovative ideas. And the crypto world, or the hoodies, sorry, the thought process of actually understanding, like, we came up with these great ideas, but how do we bring them to the next stage, right? So how do we need the business people around to actually help, which understanding when we're dealing with value and securities and money, it is highly regulated, which is different than kind of the Web 2 universe, which was really more information oriented. So this is very, very regulated. And that's the idea of the hoodies coming, or the suits coming in and actually helping. Right. So it's really working together. And it's, if you think about FTX was, I think it was a hoodie that got over his skis. Right. And I think there weren't any suits around from the risk and compliance perspective, from a board perspective, from that. And so I think that just highlights, for example, hey, let's work together. We're going to build a better product, and we'll have less false starts if we're working together. And so that's kind of how I see crypto and like TradFi and DeFi. So I think great things have happened in DeFi. I think a lot of them are very similar to TradFi. I think there's almost a nomenclature issue, right? A wallet really is like an account, right? If you have like DeFi lending is really like private lending, private credit lending. Like there's a lot of similarities, right? So a key is a password. And so I think it's just kind of understanding that, meeting in the middle and saying, hey, the suits have all this money that we're going to be able to put into the system, and the hoodies have ideas of how we can do that, and we figure it out.
So one of the things that I think has been interesting is that I work with a number of recruiters when they're trying to find people for different roles. And one of the things that was brought up by them to me is the number of jobs that are showing up on your traditional finance side that are focused on blockchain, crypto related postings, have just completely exploded. I mean, can you think of a time when a specific segment has grown 30% year over year from 2023 to the end of 2024? And right now we're on track to exceed another 30% year over year increase from traditional institutions in these spaces. And I think that's just a sign that there's a perspective that we have to start working together, and we have to start merging these things together. And heck, even a friend of mine launched a side-by-side ledgering technology for financial institutions to be able to literally put the traditional assets and the digital assets side by side to make it easier. So I'm really looking forward to that. But I would love to get your perspective on, when you think about what's to come. I know we're already 1/4 of the way into the year, but if you think about what you've seen so far this year in 2025, what are you excited about for the rest of the year?
So yes, there's a lot of growth, but I'm super excited about all the building. It takes a while to build. It's going to take less and less time with AI for coding and innovation, but I'm super excited about all of these projects, people that are looking into projects, institutions that are saying, okay, it's time, let's play. And that can be actually ideally coming up with a program, but also maybe they start in their proof of concepts, which kind of are a step in the way to that. But I'm just really excited about the momentum here. We have the dollar figure that's gone into stablecoins. We talked about $230 billion, right? If we look at which is up, I think, almost 50% from just this year, like in a year.
Yeah.
So, where is that going to take us next year? And part of it is also, we're not going to say blockchain later. It's just going to be kind of underneath everything we do. So I feel like we're on a path with that. If you think about like PayPal USD, which is a PayPal, you have a wallet already, like you have an account already, and you don't even realize you're using stablecoin. I think we'll see a lot more of that. So I think there'll be a lot of adoption in the payment space. I think in the investment space, there'll be a lot as well. From tokenized funds and opportunities to partake in different types of investments. I think also I was invited to teach at the FIT the other day, Finance Institute of Technology, Fashion Institute of Technology, which is wild, but they're using blockchain in the retail world as well. They just don't talk about blockchain. They're using it for NFTs for counterfeits to make sure that it's like a supply chain. We're working with a supply chain project also in Europe, and we're doing fan tokens as well, also in Europe. But like there's a lot of different ways that we can actually. It's not just finance, but there's ways that they all tie together. Right? They're all technically financially backed and benefit from the bottom line.
A few years ago, I had the opportunity to sit down and advise a company where they were using blockchain to track liquor and whether or not it was the real deal or it was a counterfeit. And they were doing it all the way back to, in this case, the grapes or the ingredients. So they could literally look at, hey, this bottle is number 123 of batch 456. I can tell you exactly the farmer that we got the grapes from. And the grapes were planted on this date and they were harvested on this date and they were put in the barrel on this date. And you could go back and see the entire string of everything so that when you got it, you did get an NFT as well. But when you got it, you could look at the entire history of everything that happened, and you knew if there was a gap in there that probably wasn't real. And that was really cool to be able to see on that side of the house.
There's so many different uses. Love it.
Before we go, I got a couple fun questions for you. So the first one really is, and we kind of hit on a little bit, but I'm going to ask you to dig really deep and look all the way deep inside of my nice little crystal ball here. And I want you to go 3-5 years into the future and then tell me, what is it you're seeing when it comes to this technology and how it will be used?
Oh, I'm excited. We're not going to talk about blockchain. It's just going to be more efficient. I think it's going to underlay a large portion of the payments industry, as in where stablecoin will be adopted for a large portion. I don't think we're going to get rid of cash, but I do think that the world is much more digital. I think that we'll have much more options for investing in alternative assets. I think to your point, I envision a world as well where I can look at my investments and I have cash and crypto and securities all in one, right? Debt and equities, and that just doesn't happen today because right now we have banks, we have crypto wallets, we have an investment account. And so I think the world just becomes a lot more easier. I think it becomes more digital. We'll have more access on our phones to do most of what we want. I think we will have, I think loans will be digitized as well from the very beginning. So I think that's from a financial perspective. I think that, cryptocurrencies will just be another asset class, and I think digital bonds and digital assets will go within their current, whatever they are, right? If they're equities, if they're stocks, if they're debt, it won't be differentiated. So I'm excited. It's just good. The world is going to be faster and more efficient.
Well, and the last question that I like to ask everybody is, if you were to give an entrepreneur or even somebody who's curious about this space one piece of advice using one sentence, what would it be?
Educate yourself and stay curious. I love watching podcasts and webinars. I read a lot. I watch YouTube. I have conversations. I love having conversations with people to learn things. So that's what I would say. Because this is continuing to innovate, right? Innovation never stops. And so that's the idea of staying curious.
So I'm going to ask you to get super specific here. If you were to give them 3 things to do to learn and where they should be curious, what would those 3 things be?
I would say go online on YouTube is one to watch podcasts. I would say I have Google alerts that come in on highlights of different words so I can be updated on all the articles. And then I would say read books. I actually enjoy reading books or listening to books. So those are all education things. I feel like the conversation is a lot of what you're going to find on podcasts. But otherwise, I would reach out to people. But that's 4. So I was thinking of more 3 specific.
Well, we'll let you slide with the general items and versus going.
Oh,
super
general?
specific.
You want very specific? You want super specific? You want me to name names? Is what you're saying?
Yeah, of course. Let's name names.
I would say you should read From Hoodies to Suits, right? That's a book. That's a great book. I'm happy to talk to anyone on LinkedIn. Is easier for me than X, but reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to do that. What do I follow? So, CoinDesk always has articles. I follow but I don't have any single one. I follow all sorts of, as I mentioned, I have Google alerts. That is specific to things that I'm interested in, digital assets, stablecoins, different crypto things. So I can go through that. So that's kind of specific, right? Because there's such a breadth out there. You have to be careful who you're listening to or who you're learning from. And then I have loads of podcasts. Obviously, Fintech Confidential. Right? Obviously. That's the number one. And then I listen to Bankless and Galaxy Brains and Markets Daily and, different things. I also listen a lot when I'm walking around the car, when I'm traveling.
Well, Annelise, I appreciate you getting super specific on that. And the insights that you've shared today have been great. Getting your perspective on what you're seeing, being in the space today with Kadena. I think it really does solidify the idea that this is the next step. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's going to make a world of difference.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Well, folks, that's it for this episode of Web3 with FTC. If this discussion about Web3 got your attention today, that's great. There's more where that came from. Go ahead and head over to YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen and hit that follow button. And if you want to stay plugged into everything we're doing and everything we're tracking here, go over to fintechconfidential.com and sign up. That's where all the deep dives live, as well as past and future episodes. You will be able to learn more. And be sure to share this with someone who's serious about where fintech is going. And as always, keep moving forward. As we wrap up today's episode, I've got one last thing for you. If you're in the trenches fighting fraud and financial crime, you know it's a complex battlefield. That's where Hawk's AI tools for real-time payment screening, AML, transaction monitoring, and dynamic customer risk rating come into play. These aren't just buzzwords. They're game changers designed to make your compliance more effective and less of a headache. Imagine slashing through false positives with precision and giving your compliance strategy the edge it needs. Head on over to gethawkai.com to sign up for a demo and discover how their platform can revolutionize how you fight fraud and financial crime.
This has been a production of DD3 Media with all rights reserved. This is provided for informational purposes only. It is not offered or intended to be used as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice. We strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, but will not be responsible for any missing facts or inaccurate information. You comply and understand that You should use any of this information at your own risk. Cryptocurrencies are highly volatile financial assets, so research and make your own financial decisions.